Welcome to, we don't even have a name, but welcome to our podcast. I'm Danny Metzer. I've got Milo Schindler with me here. We're going to be talking about all things basketball analytics, basketball film, and talk about how those two things can be meshed to better understand team dynamics, how individual players shape those dynamics, and how our understanding of those concepts can potentially help us find solutions for teams or players to perform better. Maybe Milo can, take the floor right now and kind of explain what he wants to get out of this.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. You really put the nail in the coffin right there. I think that what both of us share in common is that we like to look at the game of basketball from the standpoint of really trying to understand both the qualitative and the quantitative sides of it. We're very much in favor of an evidence-based approach for solving problems and for identifying them. And so I think what I'm really excited for and what I'm hoping to get out of this is to really take a deeper look at player value right now and throughout history, and understanding how the game has changed in stylistic and quantifiable ways in terms of the types of shots that teams are taking, the types of plays that they're prioritizing, the way that they build around star players, because we all know that the NBA is a league that's about superstar talent. Understanding how to optimize teams around that talent and how to pair stars with each other is really key to finding success and winning championships. That's something that I hope to understand at a deeper level.
100%. And one more thing that I want to add, I'm coming at this from the standpoint of somebody that trains basketball players. I run DM Hoops on Instagram. And in the past, player development coaches, trainers have, I think, underemphasized the value of data in basketball and how, the data and statistics that we have available can inform decisions, both within the realm of team strategy, but also player optimization. So we can talk first about what analytics even are and why they're useful. I know we already, briefly touched on that, but Milo, maybe now give a definition for analytics that is different from the narrow definitions that have been given for analytics in the past by people we see on TV or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so let's start with like the most macro definition of analytics that we can utilize. And I think that's just that analytics is a practical application of pattern recognition. So it's going into the data and identifying patterns, discovering them, validating them, looking for correlations between different variables, and then trying to interpret them in a way that allows us to make better decisions. And in the context of basketball, that means, how we can understand which types of players are going to provide us the best chance of scoring on certain types of possessions. If we narrow the data down to certain situations, like your team has 10 seconds left on the shot clock, the primary offensive play has kind of broken down, and you need someone to create a shot. We're going to look into the data and say, which player on the court right now is sort of the most efficient at creating their shot in this type of a situation. And obviously the applications for this are pretty much endless.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that last point, because I think the issue in the past with, some people and their perception of analytics is that, like I said earlier, I think Some people's definitions of analytics and why they would therefore be useful are too narrow. We're looking at, the goal should be to get very granular with it in that sense, where we should be looking at what the team's best options are in very specific moments of the game. So the team's best shot in the first 14 seconds of the shot clock might not be the same as the team's best shot in the last 10 seconds of the shot clock, depending on their personnel, depending on what kind of style they play, and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to change with this is get very, into the nitty gritty about how, again, data can inform decisions that teams make, and how, data can also potentially inform people like me who are trying to, whose main goal is to help players get better.
Right. And I think that, when you're looking at how to improve as a player, that is very context dependent and it's very situational. So the first thing that you have to approach is identifying the problem. So identifying situations in which the player is struggling, or identifying opportunity costs because of certain tendencies they have. Maybe they have a tendency to force certain types of shots out of the pick and roll, where maybe they can actually find a cutter or kick out for an open three. Understanding the situations, like the play types in which that player is struggling to provide efficient offense. Obviously, it's a little bit harder to apply this type of data because with defense, because there's not as much data collection to work with there. But I think there's still some things that we can look at in terms of what field goal percentage players are allowing on different parts of the court. And obviously, you always need to supplement any kind of conclusions that you're making about a player or a team based on statistics with, with an argument that really takes into account situational context. And you really can only get that from actually watching the games.
Yeah, totally. There's one thing that we really wanted to talk about, and that was like, you know, we want to change the view that some people have of analytics. Like we talked about the video of Charles Barkley when he was on inside the NBA, and they were responding. This was like 5 years ago, and they were responding to a statement that Daryl Morey made about analytics. And as we all know, Daryl Morey was the GM of the Houston Rockets at the time, and he had this certain philosophy about how the Rockets can optimize their possessions by essentially restricting the amount of mid-range shots that they take, and largely increasing the amount of 3-point shots that they take, particularly, ones that are created by James Harden, or facilitated by Harden after he drives or what have you. And Barkley was talking about, I'm gonna pull up the quotes right here, because I think this is some important stuff that we should clarify, and that I think, is not necessarily a very uncommon take about analytics and data. So he said, "I'm not worried about Daryl Morey. He's one of those idiots who believes in analytics. He went out and got James Harden and got Dwight Howard, and is going to tell me that's analytics. Then he went out and got Trevor Ariza. Then he went out and got Josh Smith. And then he capped that off by saying, I always believed analytics was crap." So the basis of his argument seemed to me to be that the a really important, like the most important thing, or the only thing that really matters essentially is the talent that teams are able to assemble. And it's much less so about what kinds of shots the team takes and what their style is. And I think it's very fitting to talk about how the Lakers are playing right and what we've seen from the Lakers in the
Right.
first two games of the season, because I think it's very apparent just from watching it. I know it's very early. I understand that. But we understand how people like Russell Westbrook play, from the 10 plus years that they've played in the NBA, and other veterans that are on their team like Carmelo Anthony and DeAndre Jordan, and how they ultimately play together at the same time, because it's not just about, and we're gonna talk about this, but it's not just about how um how good the players are at face value, how much talent a team has at face value. It's about how that talent meshes together and ends up, creating possessions, and on defense, how they communicate with each other, and how they um, play to sort of force the offense into shots that they want them to take. So I'm wondering if Milo, if you have any insight about that.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of address the argument that analytics doesn't work, which I think literally was the quote by Barkley,
Yeah,
which was reiterated
and
by
let's be
Shaq as
clear.
well.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, I think you need you need look no further than just offensive efficiency over the past um, you know 18 years
exactly.
to understand how profound of an impact the analytics movement and just the advent of all this shot tracking data and these frameworks for thinking about efficiency, just this whole conversation of efficiency, how much of an impact that has had. Um, to kind of illustrate that, I just wanted to look at, I actually pulled up on Cleaning the Glass, the percentage league wide of all field goals that were attempted from three in the 2003 to '04 season. It was 18% of all field goals. 18.3% of all attempted field goals were from three. Um, that figure has risen to 36.1% for the 2021 regular season. So twice as many, uh, you know, twice as many threes relative to possessions uh, over an 18, or rather, a 17-year span. That's just an unthinkable difference. And in that same amount of time, offensive efficiency has risen by essentially 10 points per 100 possessions. So it was the average offensive rating in '04 was 102.9, and that figure has risen to 112.3 in the 2021 season. So clearly there's a relationship between the volume of threes attempted and how efficient your offense is likely to be. Um,
Yeah,
and that is one of the most sort of meta macro scale revelations that the NBA has kind of been awakened to over the past. Really, it's one of the most fundamental paradigm shifts in the history of basketball. That this 3-point shot that was essentially an afterthought when it was added to the game in whatever it was, 1979, I guess, um, is now really a staple of modern offenses, and a shot that modern offenses prioritize and actually like actively seek to create on a possession by possession basis. It's what teams are looking to shoot. You know, if they can't get a shot at the rim, most likely they want to get a corner three.
And like, let's actually understand why that's the case intuitively, because let's just think about this logically, right? If players have the ability to shoot outside, and it was, as the game, as it was, very early on in the development of basketball and team strategy, you have to realize that it's normal that like teams didn't realize this. But what we know now, just logically and intuitively, is if players are able to shoot from far out, versus not being able to shoot, not being able to shoot from as far out, like in the mid range, we're talking about a difference of potentially 5 to 10 feet on average, where players line up in their half court possessions. That you're working with so much more space, and space is essential. We
Yes.
know, just it's common sense that an uncontested shot is going to be easier to take than a contested shot. And so space is so critical. And so from that perspective, it's easy to understand why, it sort of, the game sort of evolved. And because of that, because, on average, players are, a threat to shoot open 3-pointers, and defenders, feel the need to guard up. That's so much more space you're working with, and that ultimately, creates easier shots at the rim. And I think, some people could argue like, the change in offensive efficiency can be attributed to the change in rules. Hand checking, getting rid of hand checking has had an influence on what offensive players are allowed to do when they attack. But
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that like there's some combination of all of these things.
It's actually interesting on that point. On the point about spacing that you were making. First of all, I'll address that. That point is really borne out in the fact that finishing efficiency has actually risen by like 6%
Exactly.
since 2004. So in 2004, shots at the rim converted at a 58.2% clip, compared to last season where over 64% of shots at the rim were converted. So
That's huge.
Extremely significant difference in the efficiency of finishes over that time period where a lot more threes are being taken. And one more thing on the point that free throws are accounting for this discrepancy in offensive efficiency between the 2000s or the 90s and today. It's actually not true. If we want to just keep using 2004 as the benchmark, per 100 possessions, 26.7 free throws attempted per game in 2004 compared to 21.9 in 2021. So it's actually 5 less free throws being attempted per game now than back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
If you look at some of these years in the mid 2000s, like 2006, you have 28.8, 2005, 28.4, 2007, 28.1, they were taking a lot more free throws back then than they are
Right.
now. So
Right. You
it's not like players are just getting way more calls now than they used to.
exactly. I know for a fact some people would expect, some people would be surprised by that for sure. So we also wanted to talk about, because we also don't want to look at basketball purely through the lens of data and statistics. I think that there's a crowd of people that sort of fall into that trap too, where um, they are under the impression that data can tell the full picture. We have to understand what could potentially be leading to the data that we see. And if you only look at data, obviously you'll lack that context. Obviously, data on its own can give some context, especially now that we have expanded, what we look at, with all the advanced statistics that we have now. Um, but you still have to actually look at film to give you some context about what the data is describing.
Right. And I think that I was saying this to you the other day. I think that this sort of approach towards just looking at the stats and figuring that that gets you to a level of understanding that's essentially asymptotic to doing that plus watching film and
Yeah.
watching games. I think this perception really has spawned out of how much analytics have transformed the game of baseball. Obviously, stats are a log of outcomes within a game, but those outcomes don't capture um, all of the things that led up to a basket being scored, an assist being made, a turnover happening, a missed field goal. Um, so it's really important to note that different situations are differentially different domains, I should say, whether it's sports or economics or um, finances are differentially susceptible to being captured at a deep level by statistics, and we're limited by the number of statistics that are actually available to us. um, Baseball is a game that it's very much confined by the rule set, such that there's only one way to score. There really is only one way to score in baseball. You know, every player, every hitter is subjected to the same, to like a very confined set of conditions. Whereas in basketball, there are really almost an infinite number of ways that a possession can unfold. And there's so many different things that can impact the quality of a shot, if you want to take the analogy of scoring. So it's important to note that there's just a ton of variables that are really hard to capture statistically in basketball that make it unique compared to a game um, like baseball, for instance. Um, which is why it's really important. And we keep on coming back to this, obviously, but that's why it's really important to be able to actually explain um, and think critically about what confounding variables could potentially be impacting the trends that we're seeing on the court.
Exactly. Um, from an individual, you touched on this, but at an individual player level, um, this concept is important to me because, if I'm working with a player and I see that, I have data about their 3-point percentage. My like just intuitively, my instinct honestly is to figure out, well, okay, why are they shooting that percentage? Um and um what goes into explaining why they shot that percentage is often what kinds of threes we're talking about. Because I mean, on average, it's we can probably agree that it's more difficult to shoot a three off the dribble than off the catch.
Yeah.
And it could be, are we talking about pulling up off the dribble where you're able to jump straight up and down, or are we talking about a fadeaway? Are we talking about spot ups where you're stationary or where you have to come off a screen and run at full speed? There's so much context that can be involved, that can't fully be explained with data. We're getting better and better at it, and I'm always curious to see what direction analytics can go in, because I think we're eventually going to get to the point where we're going to get so granular that like we can, I mean,
We're going to be able to
we have,
adjust for all of these confounding variables to the
right.
point where,
Look, we already have play type data on the NBA site. You can easily just go onto NBA.com and look up play type data to see how efficient a player is at in spot up situations, coming off screens, off cuts. We
yeah,
have all this data available. But we had Milo and I had a really interesting conversation about what the play type data could potentially be missing, and it revolved around post ups mainly. But we did talk about a couple other things, and so with post ups, right? If you examine the play type data of post ups, in the modern sort of, I don't like calling this a movement analytics, because I it's nitpicky, but I don't it kind of can be interpreted by some people. When you say the analytics movement, it can be interpreted as a very rigid philosophy, as opposed to
right.
something that, if interpreted correctly, um quote unquote, you know um is just a matter of fact. It's not like, let's not frame it as like a rigid philosophy. But anyway, that's besides the point. With regard to post ups, we all know it's becoming much less common in basketball, period, not just in the NBA. And I think teams realized, I think the rationale behind that is that teams realize that just at face value, at the very least, at face value, having a big volume of post ups, compared to other types of possessions, like now having spacing, having players set up on the 3-point line, going 5 out or 4 out, 1 in, and creating offense out of that, um, provides generally provide we found that it generally provides teams with more efficient looks, and this can be seen through the points per possession of post ups compared to transition possessions, off screen possessions, even isolation possessions. I think in general, with the amount of players that are developing skill sets that that some people refer to as like a heliocentric style, where you have one or two players that are very good at creating offense for themselves and for their teammates, is we're seeing is a better approach when teams do have that spacing. um but now I'm sure Milo has insight as to why looking at the points per possession at face value doesn't give us enough context behind the additional value that post up possessions can provide to teams.
Right. I'm glad that you segued me into it like that, because I was actually going to, there's a few things that came to mind as you were talking that I wanted to respond to. And the first one was, yeah, I mean, on the topic of points per possession, like you were saying, you can't take everything at face value, because like if you're going to compare two shooters, right? Like say you want to compare Kobe Bryant to PJ Tucker. I don't think anyone would say that PJ Tucker is a better shooter than Kobe Bryant, but he shot significantly better from three than Kobe on his career, on, you know, actually pretty similar volume. PJ Tucker shot 35.9% from three on his career on 3 attempts per game. Bryant shot 32.9 on 4.1 attempts per game. But I think we all understand intuitively and from watching the games that PJ Tucker was taking a lot of wide open corner threes that were where he was the beneficiary of another offensive player's gravity, a better offensive player's playmaking, being able to draw in help defenders and create an open look for Tucker, who, you know, oftentimes was not considered to be, you know, a deadly offensive threat, and as a result got a lot of open looks. Whereas Bryant was, you know, especially if you go back to like the 2006, 2007 years, or even, you know, even some of the later years with Shaq, where he really ramped up his aggression to 100. I mean, I think Bryant had a game where he hit like 11, 12 threes. You know, he would catch the ball 5 feet back from the 3-point line on the right wing and just put it up with a hand in his face, no hesitation. Either because his team was down or because, you know, he felt like he had a smaller defender on him and he could get a clear look at the basket. Shot selection matters a lot when you're looking at efficiency and the types of, you know, the way that you're getting into your shot. Like you said, are you coming like running hard off a screen or off a pin down and just facing, you know, the towards the opposite side of the court, turning your body around, spinning in midair and fading away? That's a lot more difficult than just standing still in the corner, catching a pass that's right in your shooting pocket and just going up and shooting.
Yep, which is basically Kobe versus PJ Tucker, right?
Exactly.
There.
Yeah. And, you know, just I think about, you know, how this analytics thing is perceived by, I think, the average NBA fan, or, you know, even potentially players or former players and maybe, you know, old basketball lifers who are kind of skeptical of this whole influx of data and statistical analysis. I think the best way of framing it is through the lens of the scientific method, not to, you know, make this out to be some like holy quest for enlightenment, but it really is not a rigid set of rules or tenets that we're using to kind of guide us.
We're not saying never post up. We're not saying don't shoot mid-range attempts. There's context involved. The Suns, all right, last year and even now, for as long as they're going to have Chris Paul, you're not going to tell Chris Paul, an all-time, you know,
ultra efficient mid-range scorer to, you know, yeah, dude, like just shoot threes and get to the rim. And if you don't do that, you just can't shoot. Like that's there's not a lot of critical thinking going on, because we recognize that if when he gets in the mid range, he's not just a threat because of the potential for him shooting the ball. He's he has gravity in those areas. And so when he gets in the mid range, he's able to create better passing opportunities,
Yeah.
or scoring opportunities for his teammates that other other players, other point guards in the pick and roll that are just average at shooting in the mid range. You replace Ricky Rubio with Chris Paul, for example, and yeah, Ricky Rubio is an amazing passer, technically speaking, right? Um, but he's not. We're able to see the contrast between Chris Paul's ability to create for his teammates and Ricky Rubio's ability to do that in the same situation, in the pick and roll, being in the mid range area.
Yeah, I think you see with a lot of really high basketball IQ players and a lot of really efficient offensive players, that they have a hierarchy, that they're using to dictate their essentially their decision tree on a play-by-play basis. So, the first order on LeBron's shot high or play hierarchy. He takes the ball down the court. They're not necessarily calling a set play for him. It's kind of his prerogative to dictate the offense. Obviously, the best result of that possession is for LeBron to either get to the rim and be able to create a dunk or a layup, either or for him to get to the rim, and dish it off to you know either one of his big men, for an easy finish, or to a backdoor cutter who is able to obviously to get a high efficiency look at the basket or draw a foul. And if he can't get that, maybe he can the first order is always to penetrate the defense, right? Because from there you can draw in help defenders, you can either finish at the basket, or you can kick out to a good shooter for a high efficiency 3-point look.
Yeah.
If you can't get that result, then you're going to look at the next option in that decision tree, right? You're going to look at I'm going to pass it to another player on the wing, and then maybe they're going to initiate the offense in a different way. Maybe they can attack a closeout. Maybe they call for a screen. Maybe I'm going to move without the ball, try to get myself open for a shot. And if the play really devolves and breaks down, that's when I'm going to go into my ISO package and see what kind of a shot I can create. And a lot of times that's going to be a mid-range shot. And if you're the key point here is that you always have to look at what the decision tree is for a player at any given moment in time. You can't just look at these stats in a vacuum and say, oh, well, Chris Paul took 10 mid-range shots this game. That's what he needs to improve going forward. Well, you have to look at like what his alternatives were in each of those plays. So maybe he, the shot clock was winding down. He has the ball at the end of a possession and he's isolating on the wing or at the top of the key, and he's not able to just force a 3-pointer. It's likely to get blocked. He's not able to really just blow by his man and get to the basket. He doesn't have that level of quickness and let alone finishing ability at the rim anymore.
Yeah.
So the most high efficiency shot that he can create at that point in time is a mid-range pull-up or a step back. And if he's converting that, at nearly a 50% rate, which he is right now, that's an outstanding result for a possession that otherwise would have ended in a Cameron Payne heave or
Exactly.
or just some.
What were the alternatives?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were the alternatives to the play that that a player made in any given situation?
And I alluded to this about Chris Paul and you're talking about knowing the alternatives. We know he's a prolific mid-range scorer. And we've been talking about how we need to use statistics and actually watch what's going on in the games to understand how these statistics are coming about. When you look at the play type data, like when I brought up the post up example, and like pick and roll ball handler data, the points per possession that is listed, that those efficiency numbers only apply to when that the possession ends with
And them
him
taking a
taking the
shot.
shot.
Right.
It doesn't include opportunities that they may have created for their teammates, and that is so huge. That's such a critical piece of contextual information that we're currently missing. But I think again, I'm pretty sure eventually we're gonna have that data available. But in the meantime, that's why watching film is critical to actually get that context. And it's still going to be critical in the future because data gives us objective proxies for how teams and player and individual players are performing. But again, we've already mentioned this a few times. We have to know what led to that, what led to the outcomes that we're seeing in the data.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of times that comes down to being able to draw a relationship between the way that a play developed and the outcome of that play. So, for example, if it's hard for the data, or for a computer, I should say, to be able to recognize that LeBron James driving to the basket and kicking out to a guy um, at the left wing who then makes the extra pass to an open shooter in the corner, that shot was created by LeBron's drive, and he was the one who actually should be credited with the assist, even though obviously it's the player that passes to the shooter that's credited with the assist. So it's those types of things that we need to eventually have systematic ways of understanding who the creator was on a possession, and how looking at play type data. There's other factors like offensive rebounding, perhaps shots that come out of certain play types. Something that was pointed out by Coach Nick, is that maybe shots that are taken closer to the basket have a higher chance of being rebounded by the offense because the shot isn't bouncing all the way out to the 3-point line, and therefore there's some extra value there offensively, towards setting up guys in the post who, and then having additional offensive rebounders on the court, when you're running those types of plays in order to maximize the value of them.
And when you look at team efficiency, this is often portrayed through looking at a team's points per 100 possessions.
because it adjusts for pace, right? We're looking at how many points a team is able to score in 100 possessions. But what happens is when a team, gets it's generally a good way to analyze team efficiency. But let's say you have a team that is an outlier. They get a lot of offensive rebounds. Um, that adds possessions because you had a shot attempt, which counts as a possession that led to a rebound, and presumably that player is trying to put the ball back or set up, some other form of offense. And because that adds a possession, which was preceded by a missed attempt, um, can
That
that
actually
can get
dampens.
missed in
Yeah.
that can get missed in the points per 100 possession data. So
Yeah, that actually
again,
looks worse from the perspective of that team's efficiency in the data than it actually is on the court, because the outcome is the same. You
yeah,
scored without the opposing team having an offensive possession.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Without them having an extra possession.
Yeah.
You're at it, like I mean, it's obvious. If you have more opportunities to score the ball than the other team, you inherently have more of an advantage over that team. So just to wrap everything up, I hope we were able to articulate our perspective about how to look at the game of basketball and to use analytics and film to understand team dynamics, and individual performance, and how those things can inform. Like I said, I'm a player development coach, how those things can inform people like me, or head coaches for basketball teams or players. We want players to potentially get past the if you maybe nerd out about stuff like this and you play, we think it could help you to get a really granular look at all of these concepts. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We've already been talking a lot offline about potential topics that we want to cover in the future, and we can't wait to have those conversations and have you guys tune in. Support us wherever you are viewing this or listening to this. We're gonna try to have this on a multitude of streaming platforms, and yeah, catch you guys next time. Peace out.